No one was watching the old woman. She stumbled through the rain-slicked streets like a ghost already gone, muttering to herself, eyes unfocused. People stepped around her, hurried past. With the storm rolling in and the temperature dropping, she wouldn't last the night. Then a small hand took hers. Leora was 14 years old, a street girl with no home and barely enough food to last her the next 2 days. She had a threadbare blanket, half a loaf of stale bread, and nothing else in the world that mattered. She wrapped the blanket around the old woman's shoulders and pressed the bread into her shaking hands. She did it because the woman was cold and alone, and Leora knew exactly what that felt like. And then a royal guard, cutting through the flooded district, caught a glimpse of the old woman's face. He went pale. He dropped to one knee. He called for backup with a voice that cracked halfway through the order. Word spread fast. Leora hadn't just rescued some confused old woman left to die in the rain. She'd rescued the Alpha King's own mother, lost and wandering while the entire palace tore itself apart. Now the king himself is coming. And no one knows what he'll do when he finds out that a starving street orphan saved the most important woman in the kingdom. Chapter 1. Leora's fingers were numb when she found the old woman. The rain had turned vicious an hour ago. "Come on," she said, tugging gently. "You can't stay here." The woman didn't answer. Her eyes were lost, staring at something that wasn't there. Probably why everyone had moved past her. Her lips moved constantly, mumbling words Leora couldn't make out. But the rain was getting worse. Water poured off the eaves of shuttered shops. "He's gone," the woman mumbled. "He's gone." Leora's chest tightened, but she didn't slow down. The bridge was just ahead. She could see the dark hollow beneath it, the little nook where she'd been sleeping for months. She guided the woman down the slope, bracing her when she stumbled, and ducked under the stone arch. The rain softened to a distant drumming overhead. The nook was just as she'd left it, a few Hessian sacks piled against the wall, almost cozy if you didn't think too hard. Leora eased the woman down onto one of the sacks, then crouched and pulled out the bundle she'd hidden earlier, unwrapping the cloth to reveal a chunk of bread. "Here," she said, holding it out. The old woman shook her head. And then she started sobbing. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Leora's throat went tight. This was heartbreak, raw and consuming. "It's all right," Leora said softly. "You're safe now." "He's gone," the woman whispered. "Who?" Leora asked. "Who's gone?" The old woman looked up and Leora saw her clearly. She was beautiful. Beneath the wet tangles of hair and the tear-streaked face, there was something regal about her. And then her eyes turned gold. Leora jerked back, her heart jumping into her throat. "My mate," the woman said, her voice breaking. "I can't feel him anymore." Gold. The woman's eyes had turned gold. And that could only mean one thing. Shifter. Leora had heard stories. The king was a shifter. Most of the kingdom's nobility were shifters. They could turn into wolves, great hulking beasts with glowing eyes and teeth like knives. But shifters kept to themselves, so far above Leora's world that she'd never seen one up close. Until now. "Eat some bread," Leora said gently. "Everything feels better when you're not starving." Before the woman could answer, the sound of hooves shattered the quiet. Leora's stomach dropped. The thunder of horses echoed off stone, growing louder, closer. She scrambled to her feet and peered out from the nook, pulse hammering. The royal guard. A dozen riders in black and silver, their cloaks streaming behind them like wings. In her experience, the royal guard meant nothing good. They came to collect taxes, to drag people off to the stocks for crimes real or imagined. The riders slowed near the bridge, eyes scanning the shadows. One spotted the nook and dismounted. "You there!" he called. "You can't stay here. The water's rising. You'll both drown." Leora stepped in front of the old woman. "We'll be fine," she said. But the guard wasn't looking at her anymore. He was squinting at the old woman, head tilting. and then his face went pale as he dropped to one knee. "Your Highness," he said, his voice strangled. Leora glanced back, confused. "Do you know her?" she asked. The guard's head snapped toward her. "Step away from the Queen," he barked, drawing his sword. Leora stumbled back, her heart lurching. "The Queen?" "Over here!" the guard shouted. "Someone fetch His Majesty, now!" More riders appeared, surrounding the Nook in seconds. 2 guards seized her arms, their grips like iron. "Hey," Leora said, her voice cracking. "I didn't steal that bread. The baker gave it to me." And then the old woman snarled. It wasn't a human sound. Deep, guttural, wrong. Every hair on Leora's body stood on end. The guards froze. Leora turned, and where the old woman had been sitting, there was now a massive white wolf, easily the size of a horse, its fur gleaming like snow even in the dim light. "Your Highness," one of the guards said weakly. "Please." "What's going on here?" The voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Every guard dropped to one knee. Even the wolf stopped snarling. A man stepped out of the rain. Tall. Impossibly tall. Dressed in black, his cloak pooling around his boots. His face was sharp and severe, all hard angles and authority, and when his eyes caught the torchlight, they glowed gold. Another shifter. "Silence," he said, when a guard began to speak. He walked forward slowly, hands open and unthreatening. "I'm glad you're all right, Mother," he said. "We've been looking everywhere for you." Leora's brain stuttered to a halt. The wolf snarled again, pressing closer to Leora. He sighed and lowered his hand. All right. His eyes turned to Leora, sharp and assessing. "Are you the one who found her? Is that why Arwen is so protective?" Leora's mouth was dry. "So, she really is your mother?" "I asked you a question," he said. "She seemed unwell," Leora said quickly. "The storm was coming." "Address His Majesty properly," one of the guards hissed. "The king." This was the king. The man waved a dismissive hand. "It's fine." The wolf shifted, bones cracking and reshaping, until the old woman stood there again, shivering. The king stepped forward and wrapped his cloak around her shoulders. "Let's get you back to the palace," he said, guiding her toward the horses. Then he paused and looked back at Leora. "Come, child," he said. Leora blinked. "What?" The king stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, as if something had been decided. "Get in," he said, gesturing to the carriage behind the horses. Chapter 2. The carriage swayed gently as it rolled through the city streets. Arwen sat in the corner, a thick blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes closed. She looked smaller now, fragile in a way that made Leora's chest ache. "What happened to her?" Leora asked hesitantly. The king sighed. "Her mate just died," he said. "She's suffering from bond sickness. It shocks the system. Sometimes it can be lethal." Leora had heard of it. The way shifters were bound to their mates, body and soul. She'd never understood it, never wanted to. It sounded terrifying. She pressed her face to the window and watched the dirty, familiar streets fade into something else entirely. Wide boulevards lined with trees, grand buildings with marble columns, and then, rising ahead like something out of a dream, the palace itself. Enormous, all white stone and gold trim. She was taken to the kitchens first. A long table was set before her, piled with food. Roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables she didn't have names for. "Eat," the steward said simply. She didn't need to be told twice. She was then led into a bathroom unlike anything she'd ever seen. Maids appeared from nowhere, their hands gentle but efficient, lowering her into a bath before she had time to protest. They scrubbed her clean and washed her hair with something that smelled like flowers, and when they finally wrapped her in a towel so soft it felt like a cloud, Leora could barely form words. "Thank you," she managed. "Where's my dress?" One of the maids smiled. "It has been incinerated, miss. Leora gaped. "But how will I—" "The king has asked for you," the maid interrupted. "You cannot appear before him in such a state." Leora's jaw snapped shut. As the steward led her through corridors that seemed to stretch on forever, her mind raced. Why would the king want to see her again? They stopped before a pair of massive doors, and the steward pushed them open. The throne room was enormous. High ceilings, towering windows, a crowd of people so finely dressed they looked like they'd stepped out of a painting. Nobles, courtiers. No one looked at her as she entered. She was too plain, too insignificant to notice. Except for one person. A boy, about her age, stood near the front of the room, dressed in deep blue and black. His eyes, dark as midnight, locked onto her the moment she stepped through the doors. Not the way the guards had stared, cold and assessing. His eyes widened slightly, his lips parting as if he'd been struck. Leora's stomach flipped. She looked away quickly, then couldn't help herself and glanced back. He was still staring, one hand resting against his chest like he was trying to steady himself. He was beautiful. Sharp features, dark hair falling slightly into his eyes, and an elegance in the way he stood that made everyone else seem clumsy by comparison. The steward cleared his throat and Leora jerked her gaze forward, her face blazing. The king stood as they approached, and the room fell silent. "Leora," the king said. "You found and cared for Arwen, my late wife's mother, who is like a mother to me as well. For this rare act of kindness," his eyes gleamed, "I would like to thank you." Leora's throat was bone dry. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I'm indebted to your kindness, but I—" "Riven," the king interrupted, his gaze shifting to the crowd. "Come forward." The boy with the dark eyes stepped forward, and everything about him had changed. His face, so open and startled moments ago, was now perfectly blank, smooth as glass. He stopped a few feet away and inclined his head. "Your Majesty?" The king nodded toward Leora. "What do you think, son?" Leora's stomach twisted. The boy who'd been staring at her like she was something was the crown prince of the entire kingdom. Riven's eyes flicked to her, and there was nothing soft in them now. "What I think?" he said slowly. He snorted. "I'm not sure what to think of the street rat you've brought in, Your Majesty. Except perhaps that we should get rid of her at once." Leora nearly stumbled back. Street rat. She'd been called worse on the streets. Somehow this hurt more. Maybe because 10 seconds ago he'd been looking at her like she mattered. Her throat burned. "Excuse me," she snapped, "but who are you calling a street rat?" A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Riven turned to her slowly, one eyebrow raised. "It's who are you calling a street rat, Your Highness," he said coolly. The king was watching them both, something gleaming in his eyes that looked almost like satisfaction. "Riven, son," he said. "Meet Leora. She's my new ward." Leora's stomach dropped. "Your new what?" Riven asked. Father and son stared at each other. The entire court had gone silent. "She displayed kindness and bravery when she had no reason to," the king said. "Perhaps you could learn a thing or two, son." Quiet laughter rippled through the court. Riven's gaze cut back to Leora, daring her to say something, to make this worse. But her throat was too tight. She looked away, her face burning, her eyes stinging with tears she absolutely refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of all these people. Not in front of him. Chapter 3. The next few days passed in a blur of confusion and luxury. Leora was dressed every morning, fed 3 meals a day. She slept in a bed so soft she kept waking up in surprise. But she couldn't shake the feeling that it would all be taken away. Someone would realize the mistake. Someone would tell the king he'd been too generous. And Leora would find herself back on the streets. So she stayed on guard. On the 4th day, a steward came to collect her for court. The throne room was less crowded this time, mostly younger people, clustered in small groups near the windows. Nobles' children, she guessed. Heirs and future ladies-in-waiting. No one spoke to her. They went back to their conversations, their laughter, their easy comfort with each other. And then Riven appeared. He'd been standing with a group of boys near the far wall, but the moment Leora entered his line of sight, he broke away and sidled up to her. "Does anyone else smell something?" he drawled, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. He turned to Leora. "Oh, it's you." He sniffed again. "Can't quite get that stench of filth off, can you? No matter how many times you bathe." Leora's face burned, but she didn't look away. She'd survived years on the streets after escaping the orphanage. She could handle one spoiled prince. "I'm surprised you can even lift that big head of yours," Leora said sweetly. "With the weight of all that privilege you wear." Silence. Then laughter, real laughter, sharp and delighted. Riven's face went red. "How dare you talk to me that way?" "Riven!" Everyone snapped to attention. The king strode toward them, his expression dark. Leora's heart hammered. She'd gone too far. She'd insulted the crown prince. But the king's gaze wasn't on her. It was on Riven. "That is no way for the heir to the throne to conduct himself," Edris said coldly. "You will take Leora under your wing. She's new to court. You will help her." Riven's jaw clenched. Behind the king's back, Leora stuck her tongue out at him. In fact, the only friend she had in the palace was Arwen. The Queen Mother had been recovering slowly. Some days present, other days distant and lost in grief. But when she was herself, she was kind, patient. "I don't know anything about this world," Leora said quietly, staring at her hands. "I'm grateful, but I still don't understand why the king took me in." Arwen reached over and took her hand. "You shared when you had nothing," she said gently. "The king rewarded you for it, and I'm glad." Leora felt something loosen in her chest. "The prince seems to resent me for being here," she said, trying to sound casual. Arwen's expression softened. "Riven doesn't warm to people easily. He's grown withdrawn since his mother's death. And he has a difficult relationship with the king, who's always been too hard on him." She paused. "He's more bark than bite, I assure you." Leora wasn't convinced. "First rule about living at court," Arwen said. "There is your public persona, what you show others. And then there's who you are in private, with those you trust. These are not the same, and they must be kept separate." Leora nodded slowly. But it felt wrong. Dishonest. On the streets, you were what you were. You couldn't afford to pretend. Here, apparently, pretending was survival. Months passed. Leora soaked up everything she could. How to curtsy, which fork to use, how to walk without tripping over her skirts. She tried to make herself smaller, less noticeable. But Riven wouldn't let her. He used every opportunity to antagonize her, and Leora couldn't help but bite back. She'd learned quickly that if she gave him an inch, he'd take a mile. So she met every insult with one of her own. The court found it hilarious. It came to a head during a dancing lesson. They weren't partnered. Thank the gods. But as Leora spun past him, Riven stepped on the back of her dress. She went sprawling forward with a yelp. Laughter erupted. Leora's face burned as she scrambled to her feet. Fine. Two could play that game. The next time Riven moved past her, she stuck her foot out. He went down hard, arms flailing, and hit the floor with a satisfying thud. The laughter doubled. "Riven, Leora!" King Edris strode into the room, his expression thunderous. He dismissed the dance instructor with a wave. "You two," he said, pointing at them. "Together. Now." Leora's stomach dropped. Riven looked like he'd been sentenced to death. They stepped toward each other slowly. Riven held out his hand and Leora took it, her skin prickling at the contact. His hand was warm, steady, larger than hers. She hated that she noticed. The music started and they began to move. Dancing with Riven felt like holding a live wire. He moved with perfect precision, and Leora had to concentrate just to keep up. She stared up into his dark eyes, trying to read his expression. He sneered down at her. "Enjoying the view, sister?" The word was a weapon, sharp and cutting. "Please desist in breathing on me," she said. "I'll gag." "No!" They froze. Leora had forgotten anyone else was in the room. She tried to pull away, but Riven's grip tightened. The king stepped forward and pushed them closer together. "Again," he said. "You'll need to hold court someday, Riven. You need to know how to hold a lady properly." The music started again. This time was worse. Riven's body was tense against hers. This close, she could only look at his face. The sharp line of his jaw, the dark sweep of his lashes. "It would be wise," he whispered, "if you didn't look at me like that." Leora's face went up in flames. She shoved at his chest, but he held her there, finishing the dance with infuriating precision. The king watched them, something unreadable in his eyes. It became a pattern. They couldn't seem to help but bicker, and when they were caught, the king punished them by forcing them together, as if proximity might resolve what nothing else could. It never worked. It only left Riven more furious and Leora somehow flustered. Court, she decided, was even more of a battlefield than the streets. Chapter 4. 8 years later. The banquet hall glittered like something out of a dream. Foreign diplomats mingled with nobles, their voices a low hum of careful conversation and political maneuvering. Musicians played softly in the corner, something elegant and restrained. Leora stood near one of the tall windows, a glass of wine in her hand, and let herself breathe. She was 22 now. 8 years since the king had pulled her from the streets and declared her his ward. 8 years of lessons and gowns and learning how to move through rooms like this without feeling like an imposter. Most days, she still felt like an imposter, but she'd gotten good at hiding it. The king stood across the room, deep in conversation with an ambassador from the southern kingdoms. Leora moved closer, slipping through the crowd with practiced ease, and stopped just behind him. "The Dalvarian envoy," she murmured. "Third conversation with Lord Crane this evening." They keep glancing at the Eastern delegation. Crane mentioned grain tariffs twice, both times when he thought no one was listening. The king didn't turn, but a smile curved his lips. When the ambassador excused himself, the king took Leora's hand and raised it to his lips. "My dear," he said warmly. Leora's chest loosened slightly. For now, she was still valuable, still useful. She excused herself with a curtsy and made her way back to the banquet table. That's when she saw him. Riven stood across the room, his back to one of the marble pillars. Lady Marrow was talking at him, animated, bright-eyed, leaning in just a little too close. Riven's responses were clipped, but it didn't deter her in the slightest. Leora's jaw tightened. Riven had grown into himself in a way that was frankly unfair, all sharp angles and lean muscle, dark eyes that could pin you in place. A wall of ice that no one seemed able to crack, and somehow that had only made him more enticing to the court. People were desperate to be the one who finally thawed the prince, to earn one of his rare, devastating smiles. Leora found it deeply annoying. As if he could feel her staring, Riven's gaze cut across the room and locked onto hers. He lifted his chin. A dare. She lifted hers right back. "Excuse me, Lady Leora?" A young man appeared at her elbow. Leora didn't look away from Riven. "Yes?" she said absently. Across the room, Riven's gaze flicked to whoever had spoken. His jaw clenched. "I was wondering if you'd honor me with a..." Lord Ashford didn't get to finish. Riven dropped into the seat beside her with all the grace of a storm rolling in. "Go away, Ashford," he said flatly. "She doesn't like you." Lord Ashford's face went red. He stammered something and fled. Leora turned to Riven. "You don't have to be rude, Your Highness," she said, the title like an insult. Riven's mouth curved. Surprised to see you flirting instead of scurrying around gathering scraps of information from my father. He poured her a glass of wine without asking and slid it across the table. She took it without thinking. Being the king's favorite is a cross to bear, Leora said lightly. I see Lady Marrow continues to vie for your affections. Riven scoffed. I've met dead fish with better personalities. Leora barked out a laugh before she could stop herself. Down the table, Lady Marrow's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. Must you always cause such a scene? Riven said. You're not even one of us, yet you have the manners of an animal. Leora fought the urge to pout. Riven loved reminding her that she wasn't a shifter. It hadn't bothered her before. Or at least, not much. But ever since she'd seen him shift for the first time, seen the massive black wolf with eyes like fire, something had changed. She'd felt small, lesser, fascinated in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable. At least I don't grow fur, she said primly. Without looking at her, Riven loaded food onto her plate. You seem to like it well enough, he said, unbothered. Seeing how you stare at me, sister. Leora's face went hot. You wish I stared, she shot back, jabbing her fork at him for emphasis. His hand shot out and slapped the fork from her grip. It clattered to the floor. Several heads turned. Riven leaned closer. And why would I wish for that when all you do is annoy me? A servant appeared with a fresh fork. Riven spooned cranberries onto her plate. Her favorite. She speared one, trying to ignore the way her hands were shaking. If I'm so annoying, she said, licking the juice from her lips, go sit somewhere else. Riven's gaze locked onto her mouth. His pupils dilated, his breathing hitched. Just barely, but she heard it. Then he shoved away from the table so hard his wine glass toppled and stalked off without a word. Leora sat there, cheeks burning, heart pounding. He was always doing this. Always leaving her in a state of complete discomposure while he walked away perfectly composed. It was infuriating. Arwen appeared a moment later, settling into the seat Riven had vacated. What did my grandson say to you? She asked gently. Nothing, Leora said, her voice tight. I'm used to him. After the feast, guests milled about the hall. Normally, Leora would be working the room, listening, observing, gathering threads of information the king valued. But tonight, she couldn't. Riven had left her too off balance. You seem deep in thought. Lord Ashford stood before her, his earlier embarrassment replaced with a tentative smile. Yes, Leora said, seizing the distraction. Please save me from them. He laughed, looking pleased. I'd be honored. Anything to stop thinking about Riven's eyes, his hands. Anything to quiet the part of her that had wanted him to stay. Chapter 5. After the banquet, the king became a ghost. Leora would catch glimpses of him in corridors, always surrounded by advisors, always moving with purpose. But he didn't summon her. The foreign delegation remained at the palace, but Leora had no idea what was being negotiated. It worried her. Usually the king would have her listening at doors. She tried to learn what she could from the servants and from Sir Gus, her only real friend at court, ever since she'd helped him train in secret when his skills had been lacking a few years ago. But even Gus had little to offer. Some sort of treaty, he'd said, shrugging. Beyond that, your guess is as good as mine. When she was summoned to lunch the next day, relief flooded through her. Finally, a chance to observe, to listen, to make herself useful again. But as soon as she stepped into the hall, a bright, airy space filled with circular tables, Riven fell into step beside her. Her body knew he was there before her mind registered it. The way the air shifted, becoming heavier, more charged. The way her pulse jumped without permission. You look like you're dressed for a funeral, she said. I'm mourning my freedom, Riven said flatly. These lunches are morbidly dull. Leora caught sight of Lord Ashford across the room and made a beeline for him, leaving Riven staring after her. She felt his gaze on her back like a physical touch. Lord Ashford's face lit up when he saw her. "Lady Leora." He took her hand and kissed it. "You look stunning today." "You're too kind," Leora said, returning his smile. She was about to ask him about the neighboring kingdom when the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Riven stepped beside her. "Why do you keep stalking my sister, Ashford?" he asked. Lord Ashford startled and bowed quickly. "Your Highness." "I asked you a question," Riven insisted. "Is there a reason you're trailing after her like a lost puppy?" "Perhaps he just enjoys my company," Leora said. She realized her mistake the instant Riven's expression shifted. His jaw clenched. A muscle ticked in his cheek. "What are your intentions, sir?" Riven asked. "Riven," Leora hissed. "You're being rude." Before Lord Ashford could answer, Riven stepped closer, crowding into his space. "She's a human," Riven said, and the word felt like a slap. "You're a noble wolf. Clearly you don't plan to ask for her hand. Your family would never approve. So explain yourself." The words punched through Leora's chest. Everything went hot and then cold. "Human. Not one of us. Your family would never approve." She'd always known it, had always carried that knowledge. But hearing Riven, who'd grown up alongside her, state it so plainly, exposing his true thoughts. It felt like he was drawing a line in the sand and telling her exactly which side she belonged on. And it wasn't his. Tears pricked her eyes. She turned and walked away, her hands clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. "Leora." She heard him call her name, but she didn't stop. Over the next few days, she avoided him. The palace was enormous. It should have been easy. But Riven was everywhere. She'd walk into a room and find him already there, his dark eyes tracking her. She'd turn a corner and nearly collide with him. When he approached, she walked away. When he tried to speak, she turned to someone else. She even forgot about gathering information on the delegation. What was the point? She'd never truly belong here anyway. Riven had made that devastatingly clear. Years of learning to curtsy and bow and dance. Years of studying diplomacy and etiquette and politics. For what? For who? Had she been trying to prove herself to him? The thought made her throat tight. "You're spending a lot of time with Ashford," Sir Gus observed one afternoon as they walked through the gardens. "He's pleasant company," Leora said. "Pleasant," Gus repeated, raising an eyebrow. Leora sighed. "I've been thinking about matches. Marriage. Maybe it would be good to get away. Start a family somewhere away from court." She glanced at Gus. "Away from all of this. You mean away from your stepbrother?" "He isn't my brother," Leora snapped. "He isn't my anything." Gus said nothing, just watched her with those two knowing eyes. "I'm not a shifter," Leora said quietly. "I'm not even really a noble. The king could send me away at any time. I need to consider my future." "If you think your future lies with Ashford after knowing him all of 10 minutes, Gus said carefully. "It's been more than that," Leora snapped. Sure. His skepticism was plain. "Suit yourself." That night, Leora stood before her mirror in a silver dress that shimmered like moonlight, cut to hug her curves before flowing out in soft waves. She wanted to feel pretty, and like she had options. But she knew, with a certainty that made her chest ache, that she wasn't dressing for Ashford at all. She pushed the thought away and left her chambers. The ballroom was already crowded when she arrived. Leora stepped through the doors and immediately, inevitably, her eyes found Riven. His gaze locked onto her the moment she entered, and his entire body went still. His jaw dropped. Just slightly, just enough that she saw it. The room seemed to fade. The music, the crowd, the glittering lights. Her heart slammed against her ribs. This didn't feel like their usual challenge. This felt like something else entirely. An inevitability. Riven took a step toward her, his expression intense, almost desperate. Panic flared in Leora's chest. She turned and plunged into the crowd. Her hands were shaking. She pressed a hand to her chest, steadying herself, and looked for Lord Ashford. She found him in a corner, with Lady Marrow. "Oh, Leora," Lady Marrow said sweetly, her voice carrying just enough to draw attention. "I see you've met my cousin." Lord Ashford stared at his feet, face red, shoulders hunched. "Cousin?" Leora said. "I didn't know you were—" "Did you really think a noble would be interested in the likes of you?" Lady Marrow's voice dripped with disdain. "He was merely doing me a favor. Prince Riven has an awful habit of lingering around you. With you occupied, I had more time with him." She shrugged elegantly. "But it seems I've been wasting my time. So there's no need for my dear cousin to keep consorting with trash." Leora's breath came too quick. All the warmth of Ashford's attention, the small, fragile hope that maybe someone could want her, shattered like glass. The first tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. And then Riven was there. He moved into Lady Marrow's space like a predator, catching her chin in his hand. When he spoke, his voice was low and deadly. "I should take your head for your impertinence." Lady Marrow's face went chalk white. "Your Highness, I didn't—" "To question Leora is to question the king's judgment," Riven said. "Leave this court. You're banished until further notice." "Your Highness, please—" But Riven had already turned to Lord Ashford. His fist connected with Ashford's face with a sickening crack. Several people gasped. Ashford went down hard, blood streaming from his nose. Riven didn't even look at him. He grabbed Leora by the arm and pulled her out through a side door and into a deserted hallway, slamming it behind them. Then he turned to her and pressed her against the wall. "I hope you're proud of yourself," he said through gritted teeth. "Letting those two idiots humiliate you like that? After years living here, you should know better. I warned you about him." "Stop," she whispered. And then she was crying. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold herself together, but she couldn't. She felt humiliated and foolish and so utterly alone. And Riven, of all people, had had to intervene. "I'm sorry," she gasped between sobs. "I'm sorry, I thought maybe—" Everything in Riven changed. It was like watching ice melt in real time. The fury drained from his expression, replaced by something she'd never seen before. Something soft, devastated. "Leora," he said. Her name was barely a whisper. Slowly, so slowly, like he was afraid she might shatter, he reached up and cupped her face in his hands. His touch was impossibly gentle. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough. His thumbs brushed away her tears, the gesture so tender it made her chest ache. Leora's gaze dropped to his mouth. That beautiful, cruel mouth that had said such terrible things to her, that she'd spent years trying not to think about. She wanted him to kiss her. The realization hit her like lightning. She wanted him to close the distance and press his lips to hers. Riven's breathing changed, became ragged. His eyes darkened, pupils swallowing the brown. He was looking at her mouth, too. Her eyes fluttered closed. The sound of breaking glass shattered the moment. Riven jerked back like he'd been burned, his hands falling away from her face. Distant but clear, the king's voice rang out from the ballroom. "If I could have everyone's attention, please. I have an announcement to make." Riven's expression shuddered. The softness vanished, replaced by something careful and controlled. He stepped back, putting distance between them. And Leora stood there, her face still wet, her lips still tingling with anticipation, feeling like she'd just lost something she'd never even had the chance to hold. Chapter 6. They made their way back to the ballroom in silence, the sounds of music and laughter growing louder with each step. "Riven?" Edris called. "Where is my son?" The king's eyes swept the crowd and landed on them, sharp on Leora before shifting to Riven. "There he is." A smile spread across his face. "Come up here, son." Riven's jaw tightened, but he moved forward, weaving through the crowd toward the platform where the king and a beautiful woman were waiting. When he reached the stage, the king clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture that looked affectionate but felt somehow possessive. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Edris announced. "This marks a momentous occasion, the joining of two kingdoms." He paused, letting the anticipation build. "Please raise your glasses and toast to the engagement of Princess Celestine of Valoris and my son, Prince Riven." The room erupted. Cheers. Applause. Leora found a glass of champagne in her hand. She didn't remember taking it, and she downed it in one burning gulp. Engaged. Riven was engaged. She watched as he stood beside Princess Celestine, his face an emotionless mask. The princess smiled graciously at the crowd, her hand resting lightly on Riven's arm. Leora couldn't breathe. The room felt too hot, too crowded. She needed to leave. She slipped through the crowd and pushed through a side door into the gardens. The cool night air hit her face, but it didn't help. She could still hear the music, still hear people laughing and celebrating. Of course he was always going to get married. He was a prince. But somehow, in all these years, she'd almost forgotten who and what he was. He'd just been him. Riven. The person she fought with. The person who knew exactly how to get under her skin. Her chest felt like it was caving in. She reached the far end of the gardens, where the manicured lawns gave way to wild forest, found the crumbling section of wall she'd discovered years ago, and scrambled over it. The forest welcomed her with darkness and silence. Now, surrounded by trees and shadows, the evening replayed in vivid flashes. Riven's eyes on her when she'd entered the ballroom. Lady Marrow's cruel words. Though she realized now what had hurt most wasn't the trick itself. It was what Riven would think, what he'd see when he looked at her. And then his hands on her face, so gentle it had made her want to cry. The way she'd wanted him to kiss her. A scream tore from her throat. She sank to the forest floor, pressing her hands against the earth. "Where do you think you're going?" Leora's head snapped up. Riven stood a few feet away, jacket gone, wearing only a thin black shirt that clung to his frame. "It could be dangerous out here alone," he said, his voice rough. "I've been here alone plenty of times," Leora snapped. "It's fine." "You left the ball." He took a step closer. "The king did not give you leave to go." "I don't need your permission." She stomped her foot, feeling childish and not caring. And then reality crashed back in. Riven, who was engaged, was alone with her in the forest. "Riven." She forced herself to stand. "You can't be here. It's not appropriate." "Appropriate?" he snorted. "For who?" "You don't understand how precarious my place here is." The fear she'd been carrying for years spilled out. "I have no claim to anything. I'm here because the king allows it, and that could change at any moment." "And you have no idea the pressure I'm under," Riven shouted back. "I've just been forced into an engagement I don't want." Leora froze. "You didn't want this engagement?" Her voice came out small, almost hopeful. Riven's dark eyes locked onto hers. "Of course not," he said, his voice dropping. "Why would I want to marry some princess when I—" He didn't finish the sentence. His defenses fell away and his mouth crashed into hers. Kissing him back was as easy as breathing, as natural as her heart beating, as inevitable as the sun rising. His lips were soft and demanding all at once, moving against hers with a hunger that made her knees weak. His hands slid down her body until they cupped the back of her thighs, and he lifted her effortlessly. She wrapped her legs around his waist without thinking. He groaned, low and desperate, and heat flooded through her entire body. "You'll ruin me," Leora gasped between kisses. "Should I stop?" he asked, his lips moving to her jaw, her neck. "No," she breathed. "Please don't." He carried her to the clearing and laid her down on the soft moss, following her down, settling between her legs. His weight was solid and real and right. His hands found the laces of her dress. She helped him, fumbling with trembling fingers, then tugged at his shirt and he pulled it over his head in one smooth motion. They both froze, staring. "Utterly ruined," Riven breathed, his eyes dark and hungry. Leora giggled, and he smiled. Actually smiled, rare and beautiful and devastating. And then he was kissing her again, his touch setting her on fire. She touched him back, marveling at the hard planes of his body, the way his muscles jumped beneath her fingers, the sharp intake of breath when she dragged her nails down his back. "Look at me," he commanded softly, his voice wrecked. She did. His eyes were molten gold, his wolf rising to the surface, intense and possessive and so full of emotion it stole her breath. When they finally came together, Leora felt the earth shift beneath her. Pleasure she'd never imagined, building and cresting until she shattered in his arms. But it was more than that. He wasn't just a part that fit. He was something she never knew she was missing. After, they lay tangled on the moss, the cool night air raising goosebumps on their skin. Riven pulled her close and pressed kiss after kiss to her face, and Leora felt joy bloom in her chest, bright and absolute. "I love him," she realized. "I've always loved him." She wanted to say it, but before she could, Riven kissed her again and she lost the ability to form words at all. So she kissed him back instead, pouring everything she felt into it, and let herself, just for this moment, be happy. Chapter 7. Leora woke to sunlight streaming through her window and an empty bed. For a moment, panic fluttered in her chest. Then she saw the indent in the pillow beside hers, felt the pleasant ache in muscles she'd never used before, and memory flooded back in a rush of heat. Riven. They'd snuck back to her room in the early hours, unable to keep their hands off each other. He'd been insatiable, touching her, kissing her, pulling her back into his arms every time she tried to catch her breath. The sheets smelled like him. She buried her face in them and breathed deep, a smile spreading across her face. He must have left early to avoid being seen. She forced herself out of bed and bathed thoroughly, scrubbing every inch of her skin. The court was full of shifters with unnaturally sharp senses. The last thing she needed was someone catching Riven's scent on her. She wondered how the king would take the news. The broken engagement was a political alliance, after all. But surely the happiness of his only son would matter more. And he'd always liked her. Her heart swelled with hope and giddy anticipation. She dressed quickly and made her way to breakfast, practically floating down the corridors. The dining hall showed clear signs of the previous night's revelry. Nobles moving slowly, speaking in hushed tones, nursing cups of tea. Riven was nowhere to be seen. "Leora," the king called. "Join me." Edris was in good spirits, talking animatedly about the party. "I didn't see you for most of the night," he said, giving her a curious look. "Did you enjoy yourself?" "Yes, Your Majesty," Leora said, focusing very hard on her plate. As she ate, a knot of worry began to form. Riven clearly hadn't spoken to him yet. Maybe he was waiting for the right moment. "Lady Celestine would like you to join us for dinner tonight," Edris said casually. Leora nearly choked on her tea. "She does?" Edris smiled warmly. "You're my ward, and she's smart to cultivate a relationship with you. She'll be part of this family soon." The words felt like ice water down her spine. "Of course," Leora said faintly. "I'd be honored." That evening, she told herself that when she saw Riven, everything would be okay. He'd look at her the way he had last night, and the knot in her chest would loosen. But when she entered the private dining room, Riven was already there, standing beside Princess Celestine. He didn't leave her side, not once. The conversation flowed around her. Trade agreements, diplomatic relations, and inevitably, the wedding. "What do you think of a winter wedding?" Princess Celestine asked sweetly. "All that snow. I think it would be romantic." Riven sent her a brief look. "Sure," he said. Leora's heart cracked. Sure. As though he actually planned to go through with it. She stared at him, willing him to look at her. But his gaze stayed fixed on his plate. On anything and anyone except her. For years, she'd kept her guard up around Riven. She'd been proud to be the one person who could get under his skin. And in one night, he'd undone all of that. He'd made her feel things she'd never felt before. Now he was putting her behind the same wall of cold indifference where he kept everyone else. She meant nothing. Every course felt like torture. Every moment Riven spent not looking at her carved out another piece of her heart. When the king finally pushed back from the table and suggested drinks in the drawing room, Leora stood too quickly. If you'll excuse me, Your Majesty, all the excitement has caught up with me. I think I need to lie down. The king looked at her kindly. Of course, my dear. Rest well. She curtsied and fled. She made it halfway to her room before the weight in her chest became unbearable. Leora! She looked up through her tears to see Sir Gus hurrying toward her. Are you well? He asked. I'm afraid not, Leora choked out. I can't stay in the palace. Don't ask me to explain, Gus. I need to go. I can't breathe here. Gus's eyes widened, but he searched her face and must have seen something there that convinced him. He nodded slowly. All right, he said quietly. I know a place. Leora nodded, relief flooding through her even as her heart continued to break. She couldn't stay here. Couldn't watch Riven marry someone else. She had to leave. Chapter 8. The cottage appeared through the trees like something from a half-forgotten dream. Small and modest, with ivy climbing the stone walls and smoke curling from a single chimney. Leora stared at it and felt nothing. It's not much, Gus said quietly, helping her down from the horse. But my family owns it. We only keep a cook and a maid here, so it's quiet. You can recuperate. Leora nodded mechanically. Thank you, Gus. He showed her inside, up a narrow staircase to a modest but comfortable bedroom. A fire had already been lit in the hearth. Before he could leave, Leora caught his sleeve. You have to keep this secret. No one can know where I am. Gus studied her face. To really keep it secret, I'd have to cover our tracks well. A shifter could track you. He paused. Do I need to cover your tracks, Leora? She averted her gaze but nodded. When he left, Leora sank onto the bed and slept for days. A month passed. She couldn't get out of bed, could barely lift her head from the pillow. All she could do was think about Riven, their night together, his lips on hers, his eyes watching hers, dark and molten and full of something that had felt like love. And then how he'd sat beside Princess Celestine at dinner and agreed to a winter wedding. Not even a glance. Nothing. The maid, a kind older woman named Anna, brought soup and tried to coax her to eat. Leora managed a few spoonfuls before her stomach turned. Her condition only worsened. The nausea became constant. She couldn't keep anything down. Gus returned, his face tight with concern. There's something going on, Leora. This isn't normal grief. She didn't have the strength to argue. Congratulations, the doctor said a few days later. You're with child. Leora stared at him, her mind blank. When he left, she lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. Pregnant, with Riven's child. And then she started crying. Because all she wanted was to tell him. To have him here. But he'd chosen someone else. The following day, she sat with Gus in the small sitting room, nursing a cup of hot honey and lemon. I think we should get you back to the palace, Gus said carefully. Panic shot through her. No. Better for the king to think I've run away than for him to know I've... She couldn't finish the sentence. Gus hesitated. And the father? Leora tensed. Her mind filled with images of Riven. His hands in her hair, the way he'd looked at her like she was his entire world. Just some footman after too much champagne, she said. A mistake. The lie tasted bitter, but Gus didn't press. 2 months passed. Slowly, Leora grew stronger. The sickness eased. She spent her days walking through the small garden, her hand resting on her stomach, talking softly to the life growing inside her. She was growing attached to the baby. Fiercely, protectively attached. She knew she had to make decisions. She wouldn't raise her baby on the streets. She'd rather die first. But she didn't know if she could stay this close to the palace, this close to Riven. And then there was the fear that kept her awake at night. The baby was his. A bastard child conceived with the king's ward while Riven was engaged to a foreign princess. A diplomatic nightmare. A scandal that could damage alliances. Would Riven protect her? Would the king? I'll protect you, she whispered to her baby. I promise. The knock came late one afternoon. Anna and the cook had gone into town, leaving Leora alone by the fire, her hand absently rubbing circles on her stomach. The pounding at the door made her jump. She pulled it open and froze. Riven stood before her. He looked wrong. Huge dark bags under his eyes, breathing too fast. And his eyes were wild, fevered. Leora, he breathed. You were gone. Why did you leave? Then his hands were in her hair, his lips on her face, kissing her like a man starved. For 1 second, she couldn't help herself. She kissed him back, her body responding before her mind could catch up. But then reality crashed back in. She pressed her hands against his chest. I'm not your plaything, Riven. Why did you leave? He moaned against her neck. His skin was warm, too warm. He began to scent her, his nose dragging along her throat almost desperately, and she felt herself yield, her head tilting, her fingers threading through his hair without permission. He inhaled deeply and tensed. You smell different, he said, pulling back to look at her. Slowly, his gaze dropped to her stomach. He dropped to his knees. Are you? His voice was filled with such awe it squeezed her heart. Are you with child? They could have had this, she thought, tears pricking her eyes. They could have learned of the pregnancy together, been happy together, but he'd chosen to stay engaged instead. Please leave, she said, pushing him away. He stood, and she saw with shock that his eyes were watery. Tears. She averted her gaze. She didn't have it in her to see cold-hearted Riven cry. Leora, his voice wavered. Is it mine? She didn't reply, just moved away, putting distance between them. Why didn't you tell me? I would have... You would have what? Leora interrupted. You're engaged, Riven. Is that why you left? He asked. Because of the engagement? What did you expect? She said. That I'd stand there and act like Celestine's bridesmaid? I don't care about her, Leora. His voice cracked. I only want you... He reached for her. I'm sorry. I should have told you, but I... Go home, Riven. How can you ask me to go home? He stepped in front of her and took her hand, pressed it against his chest. You are mine, Leora. And I'm yours. Can't you feel it? We could run away. Leave all of this behind. His hand tightened on hers. I love you. Her heart broke. Screamed at her that she loved him too. That she'd loved him for years. But she was scared. She didn't trust him anymore. You can't keep doing this, she said. You can't keep finding me and complicating things. I had a role, a life. But you wouldn't leave me be, and then you just... Her voice broke. You hurt me. I never meant to cast you aside, he whispered. You've been trying to cast me aside since I set foot in the castle, she protested. Riven flinched like she'd struck him. No, that's not. You never accepted me. You made fun of me. I had to, Riven said desperately. Please! But she couldn't bear it anymore. He looked so devastated, and it wasn't fair. How dare he look sad? She'd done nothing wrong. "Go home to your fiancé, Your Highness," she said coldly. He looked like she'd run him through with a sword. She slammed the door in his face. Then she leaned against it and slid to the floor, pressing her hand to her mouth to muffle the sobs. "You're doing the right thing," she told herself. Stability. Safety. Not uncertain passion with a man who changes moods like he changes shirts. She told herself that. And yet she cried so hard she thought she might break in half. Chapter 9. For the longest time, Leora sat with her back pressed against the door. Her body screamed at her to open it, to chase after Riven. But she didn't move. She needed to think. And right now, with her heart breaking and the ghost of his touch still burning on her skin, she couldn't manage it. She didn't know how long she'd been sitting there when the knock came. "Leora?" Gus's voice muffled through the door. "Leora, are you in there?" He stepped inside, took one look at her and said softly, "Oh, Leora." He pulled her to her feet, guided her to a chair, and made her tell him everything. "Let me get this straight," Gus said slowly. "The father of your child isn't some random footman." "No," Leora said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "The father of your child is the crown prince," Gus said. "Our future king." Leora grimaced. "Our future king who," Gus added, "you've basically been in love with your entire life." Leora's eyes snapped to him. "That's not—" "Shut up," Gus said. "You're obsessed with him. And he with you. Obviously he's the father." Leora hit his arm weakly. "The man you love, who loves you, is the father of your child," Gus continued. "And he offered to drop everything. His engagement, the crown, his entire life, to be with you. And you told him you weren't interested?" Leora felt heat rush to her face. "When you phrase it like that, it sounds awful." Gus gave her a look that said, "Because it is awful." "He kept his engagement after we made love," Leora said defensively. "But did you talk to him?" Gus interrupted. "Ask him what he planned to do? The engagement is tied to a political alliance. Breaking it can't be done in 5 minutes." Leora blinked. She hadn't thought about that. "Oh, gods!" she gasped. "You think he would have?" "I don't know," Gus said gently. "But you owe it to yourself, and your child, to discuss this with him properly. You don't understand what it's like being near him," she said. "When he's there, I can't think. I just react." "It sounds like a bond," Gus said, frowning. Leora froze. "What?" She was about to dismiss it, but then she remembered how Riven had looked earlier. The glassy eyes, the fevered skin. The way he'd said you were gone like it had destroyed him. And suddenly she remembered Arwen that night in the rain. She'd just lost her mate and had been delirious, lost, saying he's gone, over and over. "But we never—" Leora couldn't finish the sentence. "Try to focus," Gus said, leaning forward. "On him. If you have a bond, even an incomplete one, you should be able to sense him." "That's impossible," Leora shook her head. "It would explain why you were so unwell when you arrived," Gus said. "Weeks barely getting out of bed. And Riven." He paused, grimaced. Leora's heart started to race. "What? What's wrong with Riven?" "He's been unwell," Gus said carefully. "Erratic. Not himself since you left." Leora shot to her feet. "Why didn't you say?" "You had enough on your plate," Gus said. "Just try. See if you can feel him." His face looked grim, worried in a way that made terror spike through her. Leora closed her eyes. At first, there was nothing. Just her own fear, the rapid beating of her heart. But then, something in her chest snapped. Irrevocably broken, like a string pulled too tight, finally severing. And through the break, she felt pain. Not hers. His. "Riven!" she exclaimed. Logic flew out the window. She turned and ran out into the falling night. She felt a pull, weak and stuttering like a candle about to go out. And she knew something was wrong. She ran through the forest, her dress catching on branches, her feet stumbling over roots. The pull grew weaker with every step, fading like a dying heartbeat. "No," she gasped. And then she tripped over something. Someone. Riven lay unconscious on the forest floor. "Riven!" She dropped to her knees, her hands going immediately to his face. He was burning up. His skin was so hot it hurt to touch, but there was no injury, no blood. Gus arrived behind her, breathing hard. "Definitely bonding sickness," he said. "But we're not bonded," Leora said, her voice breaking. "We can't be bonded. We never—" "That's the problem." Gus ran a finger over one of Riven's inflamed veins. "Look at these marks. I've never seen a case this bad." He looked at her, his expression grave. Riven must have been holding this at bay for years. Leora's mind spun. Years. He'd known for years that they were mates, and he'd never said anything. "We need to get him inside," Gus said. "Now." Between the two of them, they managed to half-drag, half-carry Riven back to the cottage. Nothing would bring his fever down. His body trembling, his breathing shallow and labored. "What do I do?" Leora asked desperately. "How do we help him?" Gus hesitated. "Tell me," Leora insisted, grabbing his arm. Gus sighed. "Nothing can help apart from completing the bond. Certain bonds can be broken with time, but—" He looked at Riven and grimaced. "What is it?" Leora's voice rose with panic. "Look, I'm not a healer," Gus said carefully. "But I don't think he'll survive this." The words hit her like a physical blow. "No," Leora shook her head violently. She turned back to Riven, taking his face in her hands. "You have to wake up," she said through her tears. "Please, please wake up." He remained unresponsive. His skin burned beneath her palms. "You don't have to claim him if you don't want to," Gus said quietly. "You're human. You'll survive the broken bond." But Leora knew she couldn't do that. "Leave us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Gus nodded and slipped out, closing the door behind him. She'd loved Riven for so long, had fought against it, denied it, tried to bury it under anger and pride and fear. But it had always been there. "I love you too," she whispered, leaning down to press her forehead against his. "Of course I'm yours. I've always been yours." She bent and kissed him, soft and gentle, pouring everything she felt into it. "And you are mine," she said against his lips. He didn't move. Terror clawed at her throat. She pressed her fingers to his neck. His pulse was there. Barely. So faint and irregular she could hardly feel it. "Don't leave me," she sobbed into his hair. "Please don't leave me." For a long moment, there was nothing but silence and the sound of her crying. And then she felt it. The faintest flutter against her chest. And arms wrapping around her. She pulled back with a gasp. Riven's eyes were open. Barely, just thin slits, his pupils blown wide. "Say you love me again," he murmured. A sob burst out of her, half laugh, half cry. "Always so bossy," she said. His emotions flooded through her. Relief, joy, love so overwhelming it stole her breath. "You need rest," Leora said, even as she leaned into him. "You almost died." "I don't need rest," Riven said, his hands coming up to cup her face. "I only need you." He pulled her into a kiss, desperate and claiming and full of everything he hadn't been able to say. They came together with a hunger that felt like starvation finally being sated. And through it all, she felt him. His love pouring through the bond in waves that made her dizzy. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the dark, his arms wrapped around her, her head on his chest as his heartbeat slowly returned to normal. "Riven," she said softly, tracing patterns on his skin. "Why hold back all these years?" Why not tell me we were mates? She felt him tense. Because of my father, he said quietly. Your father? She asked. Surely he'd want you to be happy. Leora, Riven sighed. He already knows. The words didn't make sense at first. Then they did. The king knows we're mates, Leora said. Riven leaned back. The second I saw you, I knew you were mine, he said. But it was clear my father had brought you to court with some plan in mind. At first, I thought it was to pit me against you, to motivate me by introducing a rival. So I acted like I thought he expected me to act. For your protection, and for mine. He pulled her closer. I wanted you close to me. Always. Leora hugged him tighter, her throat burning. It was only later I realized, Riven continued. He planned to use my attachment to you as leverage. If I ever refused him, he threatened to send you away. Leora gasped, pulling back to stare at him. She thought back to her first days at the palace. How surprised she'd been that the king had taken her in. How she'd never quite understood why. She'd been right to question it. He'd never cared for her. Had only used her as a tool to manipulate his son. What happened the night of the engagement? Leora asked, her voice shaking. I went to my father, Riven said. I felt our bond snap more firmly into place, and I thought, fated bonds are sacred for our kind. He wouldn't separate me from my mate. So I told him we were as good as fully bonded. He paused, and she felt his shame, his fear. I've never seen him so angry, Riven said quietly. He told me I had to marry Celestine. That if I didn't, he wouldn't just send you away. His voice dropped to a whisper. For the first time, he threatened to hurt you. Leora felt his fear through the bond, raw and terrible. I didn't know what to do, Riven said. I didn't want to agree, but I was afraid for you. So I agreed to buy us time. You've done nothing wrong, Riven, Leora said, pulling his hands away from his face and holding them tight. Nothing. I've done everything wrong, he said, his voice cracking. When you left, for the first time, he had nothing to threaten me with. So I left too. He took her face in his hands. I've been searching for you ever since. Really? Leora breathed. Of course, he said. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. I've already renounced my claim to the throne. None of it matters. You're what matters. You and our child. Tears streamed down Leora's face, but for the first time in months, they were happy tears. Riven, she said, breathless. I want you to do it. Something dark and possessive sparked in his eyes. There's no going back if I do, he said. She nodded. He took her wrist gently, reverently, and brought it to his mouth. His eyes held hers as he bit down, hard enough to break the skin, to leave the perfect imprint of his teeth. She gasped at the sharp pain, then at the pleasure that flooded through the bond as he licked away the blood. The marks remained on her wrist, already beginning to scar. Your turn, Riven said, his voice rough with emotion. Where? Leora asked, looking at him with a smile. Wherever you want, he said. She leaned forward and bit down hard on his shoulder. Riven groaned, a sound of pure pleasure, and pulled her closer. When she pulled back, the imprint of her teeth remained on his skin, stark and perfect. He can't reach us now, Riven said softly, pulling her back into his arms. We only belong to each other. Leora nestled into him, feeling the bond between them pulse with warmth and light and love. Epilogue. The next few days passed like a dream. Gus returned to the cottage and found Riven on his feet, color returned to his face, the terrible fever finally broken. His relief was palpable. I won't tell the king where you are, Gus promised, clasping Riven's hand. Stay as long as you like. The cottage is yours. And so they did. Leora could hardly believe the difference in Riven. Gone was the cold, controlled prince who'd kept everyone at arm's length. This Riven was warm, open. He smiled easily, laughed easily, and took every opportunity to whisper how much he loved her against her skin. He was like a new person. Or perhaps, she realized, he was finally himself, free from his father's manipulation. But as the weeks passed, troubling news began to filter in through Gus's visits. The palace was in disarray. With Riven's renunciation of the throne, the line of succession was broken. The king was furious, and foreign delegations were demanding answers. The kingdom was falling apart. Riven and Leora began making quiet plans to move to a neighboring kingdom, somewhere far from Edris's reach. And then Arwen arrived. Leora answered the door expecting Anna or perhaps Gus. Instead, she found the Queen Mother on the doorstep, a small guard detail behind her. "Ah, there you are," Arwen said, her eyes twinkling. "I assume you know where my grandson is?" Before Leora could answer, Riven appeared behind her. "Grandmother." Arwen beamed. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation and took Riven's face in her hands. "There you are, my boy," she said. "Finally. The light has returned to your eyes." They sat by the fire, tea cooling in cups no one touched. "Edris is going out of his mind," Arwen said bluntly. "The palace is in chaos, but the king has no one to blame but himself." Her gaze turned sharp. "You are mated now. Truly, properly mated. And more than that." Her eyes dropped to Leora's stomach, where a small but unmistakable curve had begun to show. "You carry the future of the kingdom." Leora's hand moved instinctively to her belly. "Nothing is more important than the succession," Arwen continued. "Even Edris cannot deny that. And you, my boy, are still the rightful heir." "I renounced my claim," Riven said. "Under duress," Arwen said firmly. "Everyone knows it. The nobles will support you. The people will support you." She leaned forward. "I propose you return." Riven shook his head. "I won't risk Leora. Or the baby. If my father—" "Your father is a politician," Arwen interrupted. "A manipulator. When my mate died and I became numb with grief, it was he who made sure I wandered off and got lost." She looked at Leora. "He thinks I don't know, but I do. He was hoping I wouldn't come back. I'd been making the crown look weak. And you found me, protected me, and thwarted his plans. He's had a thing against you ever since." Leora stared at her. All these years, she'd thought the king had been grateful, had thought he liked her well enough. How wrong she'd been. And it had almost cost her her mate. She reached for Riven's hand, threading her fingers through his. She'd seen the kind of man he was these past few weeks, free from his father's shadow. He would make a great king. But mostly he would be free. And that's what she wanted for him. "I think we should do it," Leora said softly. Riven turned to her, his eyes searching her face. "Leora!" "I'm not afraid of your father," she said. "And the kingdom needs you, Riven. Needs the kind of king you'll be." Something shifted in his expression. The doubt faded, replaced by determination. "All right," he said. "We'll go back. Whatever battles lay ahead, whatever storms they would have to weather, they would face them together. And that was all that mattered." Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this one. There's something so quietly powerful about a single act of kindness changing everything. If you'd like more content, Patreon is where I share bonus chapters, alternate POVs, and stories you won't find anywhere else. The link is below. See you there.